The book of the week for this show is The Anglo-American Establishment by Carroll Quigley. As you noted on the cover, the American flag is upside down, which is a sign of distress, which is imposed on a larger copy of the British flag. And the book is generally about groups such as the Milner Group, the Rhodes Scholars, and other organizations that existed that focused around the South African Company, which was another equivalent of the British East India Company, but in Africa, and all that they were able to attain using these tactics of small cabals of men that remain publicly unaffiliated, but from behind the scenes have ultimately the same agenda.
Yeah, these people were involved in creating the Boer War in South Africa. They were helped in starting the First World War. They were also the people who started the Royal Institute for International Affairs, which of course has its branches all over the world, mostly in the former British Empire. We have a version here in this country. It's called the Council on Foreign Relations. And this book, The Anglo-American Establishment, is an overview of all of these different roundtable groups, where they come from, what they do, what they discuss, what their purpose is. This man, it should be noted, Carroll Quigley, the author, was essentially part of the elite. He was a professor at prestigious universities. He was a mentor to one of our former presidents, Bill Clinton, while he went through the Rhodes Scholar program. So he was also an archivist for the Council on Foreign Relations for about 20 years. So Carroll Quigley has been a part of these circles. He thinks what they're doing is a good thing. He thinks setting up a more global system is a good thing. He just didn't like the methods that they used. You know, creating fake wars, having lots of people killed off, taking over people's economies, enslaving populations to do basically slave labor for him. But he does agree with the ideal of trying to set up a more equitable and more just world. He wrote these accounts of what has been going on to try and put a true history out there for the world about the way that these societies actually operate, not with funny handshakes and secret codes and other things like that, but through a concise network of people who have had families living with each other and breeding with each other for many centuries, who have known each other intimately for many centuries, and whose families continue to rule over the planet that their older families had run hundreds of years prior.
The methods of these groups can be summed up under three headings: a triple front penetration in politics, education, and journalism. Secondly, the recruitment of men of ability and linking all of these men by matrimonial alliances and by gratitude for titles and positions of power. And thirdly, the influencing of public policy by placing members in positions of power shielded as much as possible from public attention.
Yeah, so they have a way of setting up countries to be run the way that they choose to. And they do it across the world. They've done it from India to Canada. It doesn't matter where it is, they pretty much have the same style. The Royal Institute of International Affairs, which is a round table that was set up by these people, has been gone around the entire world, mostly in the old British Empire. We have a version here, which they didn't call the Royal Institute of International Affairs because Americans have a tendency to not like the word royal. They called it the Council on Foreign Relations instead. It was set up in 1921. And these groups' primary function is to disseminate information amongst their higher members. And of course these members think that they're part of a large elite circle and they're getting privileged information. And so they come to back to their universities or businesses or financial institutions and go ahead and propagate what's already been given to them by the roundtable group heads through their journals that they put out. So he didn't agree with the methods that were being used by these people and decided to expose them in a few different books that he wrote. And this is the first one we're showcasing for you here today, which is The Anglo-American Establishment.
So we urge all of our viewers out there to get this book. So if you've really got the determination to read a rather tenuous historical account of these elite connections, then we urge you to go out and get Mr. Quigley's work and to spread it as far and wide as possible. This week's event in history is 9/11, 2001. On 9/11, North American air defenses completely failed in their general standard operating procedures numerous times where there's a break in communications on flights, and standard operating procedure dictates that anything out of the ordinary, if you have any question that something could be wrong, treat it as an emergency, and they would generally fly fighter jets from anywhere in the country in the nearest vicinity within minutes to survey the situation and ensure that something that happened that day would never happen. Another abnormality on 9/11 is that the Pentagon was supposedly hit by a passenger plane, and there was almost zero evidence of a plane hitting the building, spare for a small piece of a engine turbine that was there and a hole that went through to the inner rings of the Pentagon. Also on 9/11, William Rodriguez, a janitor working in the World Trade Center complex, who also had a skeleton key and helped rescue many people that day as a hero for it, was presidentially honored. His story is not in the 9/11 Commission's report, and he reports having explosions beneath him in the sub-basements of the World Trade Center, which would account for the free fall speed of those towers that fell with almost no resistance. And you can see from the trajectory of the debris that there was certainly explosive charges involved. And that is why we're going to talk about this paper today with our guest, which would also break into the molten steel that was found in the rubble of the Trade Center for weeks after. And finally, the real smoking gun, as they say, World Trade Center 7, which was a building that wasn't even hit by a plane and had the offices of the Securities and Exchange Commission investigating Wall Street for nefarious deeds, while also housing Secret Service offices, the CIA, and the emergency office of Giuliani himself.
Since 9/11 and everything that has happened on that day, we've had a situation where we've had an increased amount of security and an increased militarization of all of our police forces, as well as our normal, National Guard, who are being sent over, not in the national sense, they're being sent over internationally to foreign places to go fight in wars. People like Sybil Edmonds, who the government has put a gag order on, not allowing her to even speak about her case. She was a FBI investigator who was a translator, a Turkish translator, and she had discovered basically the plot of 9/11, of what was going to happen ahead of time, and tried to bring it to her superiors at the FBI, and was shut down for it and taken away from her post and eventually removed from her position. Since 9/11, we've seen a breakdown in liberty in our own country and across the world, not to mention the illegal wars that have been started because of it, which aren't even constitutional because the Congress has never even made a declaration of war. The illegal wars that have been started have cost the lives of millions of people now across the planet and have made refugees of millions more.
Prior to 9/11, there was a document by Project for the New American Century, which is a think tank for many of the neocons, which said that these elites, in order to implement these agendas which were passed in the aftermath of 9/11, need a catastrophic catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. And they certainly had that on September 11th, 2001.
Yeah, this issue really worked out well for them as far as allowing them to put forward their agenda with going to war in the Middle East. Kyle and Robo here with Unstacking the Deck. We have an interview guest today, Gregg Roberts. He has worked in public records research, information tech, activism, in a variety of issues, including 9/11. He has a graduate of UT with a BA in psychology, minor in philosophy. He, in 2006, published a paper, Where Are the 9/11 Whistleblowers? And in 2009, worked on a paper with Niels H.Harrit of University of Copenhagen in Denmark, as well as Kevin Ryan and Stephen Jones. And they wrote a paper that is titled Active Thermitic Material Discovered in Dust from the 9/11 World Trade Center Catastrophe. And he's here with us to interview and discuss the paper and other issues going on about terrorism in the world.